All right, welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 105. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com. We're excited to have with us the acclaimed educator and children's book author, Colleen Marie Olinski. Colleen.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And congratulations. You just, as of August 31st, you just had a successful Kickstarter. And you've had well over 146 backers or so, if I remember correctly. Yeah, on your the children's book.
Kickstarter actually, and the Kickstarter actually ended up being fully funded in less than 7 hours.
Wow,
which was pretty incredible. It was pretty amazing. I knew that there was a need for this book, and I really felt that there was a need for it, but the Kickstarter really kind of people really showed up for that Kickstarter. It was pretty awesome.
Right. And so talk briefly about it. Just be kind of like we can jump in and talk about A Wolf Named Elvis. Now, you were inspired by this, as you said, back in January 2021 is when you kind of had the idea about the children's book, and it just took you a month. You wrote the whole manuscript out by February, correct?
Yeah, I pretty much had the manuscript set by February. I continued to, actually, the way that it developed really from there is I shared it with children. I would share it with my friends' kids, and I would share it with, any kids that I could to kind of get feedback. But yeah, the manuscript was written pretty fast. And I had my illustrator on board, by the end of February.
And so how were you able to find, because here's the other thing, a lot of people that say, hey, I got a great children's book I want to tell, I got a great story to tell, and I just got to find an illustrator. How were you able to find Sydney later, correct?
Sydney Lander actually lives in Singapore, so it was an amazing collaboration sort of across the globe. And the way that I was able to find Sydney was I joined this incredible writers group. Jamia Drummond-Bay actually has a self-publishing course / writers group. And Sydney was actually the illustrator for Jamia's book. So okay. Jamia kind of connected us and thought that, Sydney might be really a good fit for this project. So Sydney and I met over Zoom, and I told her all about it. She was like, wow, I'm really interested in being involved in this, because she saw the need for kids and just what they've all have been through, in the past 18 months, socially, emotionally, and she was really excited. And she signed on pretty quickly, so I was very lucky in that regard.
Okay. So talk to us a bit about as you said, the inspiration of the book of A Wolf Named Elvis. It's kind of about, as you say, like self-regulation and certain things to help children through the pandemic, correct?
Yeah. So the story is actually based on my 6-year-old son. Elvis is based on my son Trevor, and Mama Wolf is actually based on me. And it sort of walks through our story dynamic of us being home together. And, as an educator, my plan had been to go back to school in fall of 2020. Like, I was signed on, I had a class list, and I was ready to go back and teach. And I sort of knew that I was going to have to show up as a teacher in a way that I never had before, because kids were going to be in such a hard place socially and emotionally after being home for so long. And what ended up happening was the school I taught at opened full time, and my son's school didn't open at all. They were fully remote. And he was in kindergarten, which is, as you know, such a critical year.
Right.
So my family was sort of faced with the choice if you want to call it a choice, of, like so many other parents, of me having to leave my job. So doing that and sort of watching what my son had been through from March 2020 on, and then going into remote learning, and watching what his classmates, because I was there online with them every day, and his teachers, and, you know, I'm auntie to all of my friends' many children, and kind of hearing what they were going through in the pandemic, I really it was on my heart to help kids, because I have 2 decades worth of experience, right? Like, I've worked with kids professionally as young as 2 all the way up to adolescence. And I wanted to help in some way, because I really thought that with my background, my experience, I would be able to help. But how do I do that from a basement, right? How do I do that from, you know, this basement kindergarten that I was in? And a book just seemed like something that I could do, you know, something tangible that I could create for kids. And the real message behind this book, I think one of the quotes that Mama Wolf has is that all feelings deserve respect. And I think it's really important to send that message to kids of, you know, you can have big feelings, and you can even have negative feelings, and they're all valid and they're all okay. But you also can be the master of those. In the book, I call it flipping your own script, right? Like, when, you know, in the book, when Elvis is really sad, he plays music, and it helps, you know, kind of change his mood. When he's angry, he draws a fierce dragon, which is actually behind me here. The dragon in the book is my son Trevor's real drawing. Actually, you have it on the screen there for a second. Yeah, and that was a true thing that happened when he was really, really mad one day about not seeing his friends. He actually sat down and created that dragon. So he drew his anger into a fierce dragon. You know, different things, like when Elvis is feeling like he's bouncing off the walls of his den, he goes out into nature and he feels free. He chases sunsets, which is something we did during the pandemic. We would actually, like, we live near the beach, so like a block from the beach. So we would kind of run down there at sunset. And just, you know, different ways that you can help get yourself back. Because I think we all were having those big feelings, you know?
Do you have, so I'm also extremely impressed, Colleen, that you wrote it in a month. So did you, and you said because you were part of, as you're saying, you're part of some groups already for some children's writing. So was there pre-pandemic, because as you said, you've been working as an educator for over 20 years for children of all ages. You know, he says of all ages and all backgrounds. So have you been thinking about wanting to write a children's book for a while, but nothing quite clicked? Or do you have like a folder someplace with book ideas?
I mean, it was one of those. Yeah, it was one of those back burner ideas, and I always, as a teacher, reading books and telling stories has always been one of my favorite parts of teaching. And so I would often make up stories on the fly with kids. And often because, you know, the last thing I did was to teach pre-K for 12 years, right? And pre-K is like social, emotional, you know, it's like an explosion time for kids, right? So I would often tell kids stories to help them self-regulate, like to kind of, you know, bring them back down. And I knew the power in that, the power in like a good story to kind of help a kid, you know, get themselves back and self-regulate. So I think, you know, I had sort of the dream somewhere in the back of writing a book, but it's certainly, you know, I never thought that it would happen. And I certainly didn't think that it would happen start to finish in 8 months. Right. And that was something I looked into traditional publishing. And as I'm sure you know, that process can take 2 years. Yeah. And this is such a timely book, right? In 2 years, this book could be irrelevant. You know what I mean? Or it could be like a time, you know? So we hope anyway. Right. But so I learned that process of self-publishing, and you know that was kind of a thing. But when you say the manuscript came together in a month, the story, honestly, I woke up January 10th with that story in my head. That story was almost complete. I just woke up and I was like, wow, a wolf pup without his pack. Like that's what we've all been feeling, right. You know, like. How essential is a pack to like a little wolf. And all of us have been at that point in isolation without our packs. And I was like, oh, that's so devastating. Like, how could he help himself? You know, and my son, even though he's a young child, he's very much a creative also. And the arts are really a way that, you know, he was able to help himself, you know. So, and I thought there was a story in that. I thought that would be something that kids could relate to. And this whole idea of finding your own magic, it doesn't have to be the things that Elvis does in the book, you know. And I say that in my letter to kids, like, whatever helps you, whatever is your thing that gets, you know, helps you feel better. So yeah, it came together rather quickly. And for the people that started following me on social media from the beginning, you'll know that I actually shared that story the day it was born, right, January 10th, with one of my best friends who actually calls me her sister Wolf. And we found a writing desk in the street. No joke. Like we were going for a walk, and like, you know, at this point it's January. The pandemic is like in a terrible place. We're like masked up on a walk outside, and we literally like tripped over this beautiful writing desk in the street with a free sign on it. And she was like, "Do you have a place to work at home?" And I was like, "I really don't." And we loaded into her car, and I was like, "If that's not the universe telling me to write this book, then I don't know what is," right?
That's awesome. So you have, you know, with that in place, what were some of the things, like, as an educator for 20 years, what were some of the things you knew right away about how to write a children's book that you didn't have to be taught, for instance?
Well, you know that you want to sneak in little mini lessons into books, right? You want to make sure that there's like vocabulary in there that's a little tricky, but also like a teachable moment. Like at one point in the book, you know, sports were something that my son used. He learned how to skateboard during the pandemic. You know, he played soccer and baseball and swimming. And I think in the book, it says Elvis learned to have perseverance. And that's a word, when I read this book to a group of kids, we always like stop and talk about what that means, to have perseverance. So I think, you know, you want to make sure that you have vocabulary in there and teachable lessons, and lots of things that kids, you know, takeaways that kids can have.
Right.
You know, and I also, the style of the book, like, you know, I love your podcast. I've been listening to like so many of the cool comic book. My son loves comic books. I was telling him I was going to talk to you. I was like, I got to go talk to this comic guy. And, you know, a few people have made the comment that like they think the style and the way we did the dialogue on certain pages is kind of like comic book-esque, like reminds them of. So that was something that we did on purpose, you know, to try to appeal to that crowd of kids too.
Right.
You want to have really vivid illustrations, things that are going to catch kids' attention, and teachers. I mean, this book is also for adults. You know, I don't think I realized the impact that this book was going to have on adults until I started really sharing it. I have had grown adults cry reading this story, even before I had illustrations. And I was like, wow, this is impactful for people, right? You know, certain scenes, there's a scene where he's doing remote learning and Elvis is kind of like this, and you can see all the different squares, and they, you know, one wolf is eating chips, one wolf is not even in his chair, one is turned backwards, one is like a crowd full of wolves, you know, sort of the real depiction of online learning, right? And that was for teachers. You know, I'll just be honest, like that was never for parents and teachers as like comic relief to try to do that. So I tried to put some of that in there too. But you just want to have a good story with things that kids can walk away with and use right away. You want kids to be inspired. You know, and when I read this book to kids, I'll talk to them about like, what's the magic in your back pocket? What are your favorite things to do when you're having big feelings? And they can tell you right there. So that was important to me.
Wow. And so how much of that then, as you mentioned, was it that, you know, working with Sydney as an illustrator? So what would be your recommendation for folks who are who are looking for illustrators who will do children's books, in the sense that did you put a contract in place, or how did that agreement happen with Sydney?
So we had an initial Zoom, and for me, the illustrator was so important because the characters were not just based on like me and my son, but every wolf in the pack is based on different children in my life. And I wanted them to resemble the kids and have that diversity. One wolf has glasses and things like that. So because it was based on a real story, that was really important to me. So I wanted to I had seen her work, which I loved. But she drew me like a prototype of Elvis before we were in contract, right. Which is super helpful if you can get an illustrator to do that. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, okay, what do I do to get her to sign on? Because I knew that she really saw the vision, and I had sent her a ton of photos of my son, and she really turned him into a wolf. It was incredible. So I saw that. I knew I wanted to work with her. I knew her previous work. I owned, Jamia Drummond-Bay's book, as I said already, and I knew that, she brings a lot of magic and kind of whimsy into what she does, Sydney. And so it was a really good fit for this book. So after that initial Zoom, we met again, and then we sort of went over a contract line by line, something that we could agree on. And that's how we worked it out. And this is my first book, so I don't know how other people do, or if it has, more than that. But we were both really wanting to do this project together, so that helped.
Right.
That helped us kind of get on the same page and form a contract rather quickly.
So I guess the other question too for folks that would be curious to ask is, how did you create that buzz? As you said, if it was fully funded in 7 hours, how did you do that from? Because you said this is your first Kickstarter. You're not a stranger to Kickstarter. You backed Kickstarters before, so you knew what to expect, or you knew your way around the site. But how did you?
Right.
How did you get all those that quick funding in there?
So I don't think this is a traditional way that people do it, but I started from real scratch. And when I say that, I mean, I didn't have social media accounts before June of 2020 or 2021. I didn't even have I had nothing. I had like a little private Facebook for my son's school, and I had like a small private Instagram with like barely any people on it. Yeah. So I was like, I need to start literally from scratch. Right. And it was going to have to be like a grassroots effort of in person, and, and we're in a pandemic. So I started my social media accounts, and as soon as I had illustrations, and I mean like the minute I had illustrations, not even a finished book, but I would say about halfway through my illustrations, I put together a binder, like legit a binder, just a 3-ring binder of the book. And the pages that weren't illustrated yet, I stuck the storyboard image in, and I, had put the dialogue in or whatever. I started sharing that binder anywhere I went. And actually my son was the one who started this. He'd be like, Mom, you gotta bring the book to soccer practice. You gotta bring the book to baseball. You have to bring the book, And no joke, that binder went with us to the dentist. It went with us like anywhere you could think of. And you would see the people's interest in it. And I really saw how like it would hit people. And then in the moment, I would grab their social media. Yeah. We would have this like connection, and, that somebody would be a teacher, or somebody would be a school librarian randomly, or someone, the barista would be a children's lit major, and I would just I'd be like, hey, are you on Facebook? Are you on, Instagram? And in those moments, I would, get a following. And I would say, hey, I'm doing a Kickstarter in a couple months, follow along, whatever. So, which is not the way that people have social media for years and whatever. And because I never had social media, people were finding me, people from high school, people from 20 years ago were like, hey, where have you, been digitally off the map, right? So I thought it would hurt me. I think it worked in my favor, right? Because people were reconnecting with me and suddenly like, well, oh, you wrote a book? Like, let me see. And they all have kids now, right?
Right.
So that was kind of the start of it. And then right before the Kickstarter, there was this little pocket of time in July where the pandemic was looking better. You remember this time where like masks were starting to sort of fade? It was like looking good for a minute, just a minute.
Yeah.
My family just decided, let's like go on a little mini tour. Even though I don't even have a book, I still had a binder, right? Let's go on a family vacation that will also be like an Elvis hype tour, right? So, no joke, we flew to Memphis and took Elvis to Graceland. we went to Graceland. And you know, what a perfect place to have a book called The Wolf Named Elvis, right? Like people stuck in line where like kids were reading it and their parents were hyped. And in the moment I would get their social media. And we did this again in Nashville. We did this, we went to Charlotte. Like, so we flew out, but then we drove back. And every stop along the way, you know, I would just pop up in a park and read to a group of kids. And at this point in the pandemic, parents were like, listen, you lady, you want to read to my kid for 10 minutes? Like, sure. You know, so I was much more well received than I expected to be. And yeah, we shared it that whole trip. That was like right before the campaign kicked off. Right. Which was awesome. There were like we were at Sun Studios in Memphis, and Mark Edward Stewart, this musician there, was like all about it, and he was like, I'll share this. So we had people like that had like, you know, much more of a following than I had. You know, what do I have? You know, however many, 100 something on Instagram, and then like 500 on Facebook, but those are like people I know, right? But these people that did have a following were willing to share. So that helped me tremendously. And that was, not a traditional way. I don't think people usually drag a binder around their whole life to do that. But that's really how it happened with this.
And so talk to us a bit about when you made the Kickstarter. You have some. What were some of your inspirations on your pledge levels that you created?
Well, I had been working with another friend of mine who was in the same position, who was a mom at home with 2 remote learners, who had to leave her job and was unemployed. Actually, the same month we had to leave our jobs. This is one of my best friends forever. She started a small business. So, you know, offering to do vinyl stickers and T-shirts and hoodies.
Cool.
So I knew I would have those things. And, you know, they do say for your first Kickstarter not to have so many tiers. I know I kind of went against that. I did want to give, you know, lots of options to people. And, you know, luckily I've had some people in the writers group that were really good business people, and they sort of kind of advised me and sat down and did that together. But, you know, this is the first time I'd ever done it. This is the first time I had ever built one, besides having help with the video from my friend who runs a video production company. I was like, I did all this myself. You know, this was me in a weekend, you know, kind of putting together all the graphics and stuff like that.
Right. Because what I find interesting is that you have on here the ability to give a book away. So people have those tiers. Yeah.
Lots of that. And I ended up, you know, I'm trying to think, it was over 100 books, if not more, being donated. I want to say way more than that. I don't know. But, and my thing was with this book, it's such an important message that I wanted to get this book in the hands of foster kids. I wanted this book to be in classrooms. I wanted this book to be at children's hospitals. You know, my son has a pulmonologist because he has asthma, and, you know, we visit our children's hospital, you know, frequently because of that. And I wanted to give back in that space too. And really, honestly, people really get in the giving spirit. I know that's something that happens with me. And I was like, if it's an option to give books, especially this book that sets out to help kids, you know, process their feelings, I I really thought people would be willing to step up, and they did in a major way. In a major way. And even people that didn't pick, donations, they had an option to add one. I would say 90-something% of my backers added or did a donation. Almost everybody.
Wow, that's amazing. And then, but the other thing too is like, so, just what would be some good Kickstarter tips you would give to someone who's thinking about launching a children's book Kickstarter?
Give yourself time to build relationships around your book. Yes, your friends and your family and your colleagues and people like that are likely going to support you. But one of the biggest things for me was really building those relationships around the book, and having people really believe in it. And they believed in the story, and they believed in the message, and they were ready, to back. There is something that I did that typically people don't do for a launch. The typical launch times for Kickstarters are 8 a.m., 10 a.m., and 11 a.m. from what my research told me. And I was really inspired by one of my best friends, who's a single mom of 3, who, her time is 6 a.m. in the morning. And if you don't catch her at 6 a.m., you might not catch her again until 9 p.m., right? And I was thinking about the working moms, and I was thinking about, like, this population, right? And I was like, they all are my best friends, and they all want to come, early and support and be there right at the beginning of the Kickstarter. Well, if I launch at 8, that's a terrible time. If I launch at 10, that's a terrible time. Right. So inspired by that, I said, I'm going to do something nobody does, and I'm going to launch at 6 a.m. Now, it turned into this thing, Barney, right? It turned into this thing where all the moms, like, kind of were like, oh, we're going to come in early. We're all going to, like, and then it spread beyond that, and people were like, I'm going to set my alarm. It's Kickstarter day. Like, we're going to do this. And it was like people that were already planning to back. Right. They were like, let's see what I can do. So and then everyone was kind of encouraging each other to come in between 6 and 8 a.m. Mm-hmm. And I believe by 8 a.m. I was like 50 or 54%. It was honestly, it was wild. It was wild. And I was just like watching it happen, and I was like, wow, like the power in that, right? Right. And I'm like, I'm sitting there and I'm laughing. I'm talking to my friend that inspired me to do this, and I was like, "Thank you." Like, yeah. And then it just went, and it was like by lunchtime, before 1 p.m., we were funded. Yeah. And it was, I wasn't expecting that, right, for sure. I did really believe that I would get the funding, right, but I didn't expect. That was a very pleasant surprise. Right. And how did you do, so, you may have somebody say, hey, I got something made, I got everything here. How did you put it together? Now, I'm just talking about the logistics of it. So how'd you find the printer? What did you have a program like InDesign or something like that? How did you create the book itself? Well, a lot of the formatting, Sydney did a lot of the formatting. That was in our contract, like towards the end, like the formatting of the book. And my printer I actually found through one of the Facebook groups, children's authors groups. Right. We all sort of learn from each other and watch, each other's Kickstarters and programs and things. And I had noticed that someone had gotten their books very fast. And I was wondering, like, how did that happen? Because a lot of people order from China and overseas. And that was something that I looked at. I actually had a printer in China that I was talking to. But when COVID kind of took a turn again, right, it was looking like I wasn't going to have books until, November. And I really wanted back to school. Right. I really wanted to be able to support kids, and everything I had done leading up to then. I had hoped to have these books for like September, October. So they're here. All 1,000 books are here. I posted a reel today showing the arrival of the 1,000 books, which is a riot. But yeah, so I found a printer in the U.S. who has a pretty quick turnaround, and I was able to do that. Yeah. So
That's and so you I saw that. Yeah, I saw your reel you put on there, like the coming on pallets and all that kind of fun stuff. Yeah. And so and then like you said, your friend helped you with like the stickers and the bookmarks and the shirts and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yep. Yeah. So for the most part, I mean, I ordered, bookmarks from a different company and things like that. But, and I was so happy to be able to involve her and support her too. And, I think especially in this pandemic, the parents who had to make the choice to leave jobs. I mean, I've never been unemployed in my adult life. You know what I mean? And it was a huge change for so many of us. And so to be home as mothers and, to have our own startups and small business. And, it was awesome to be able to work with her and support her in that.
Right. No, so I have to ask you, Colleen. I mean, you created a publishing company, Mama Wolf, right? So
yeah.
So you must be having another book. You must be having some more ideas of coming together now, right?
I have a sequel outlined.
Yeah.
And honestly, I have like spin-off ideas for each wolf because, as I said, the whole pack is based on kids in my life. So like it kind of. And in different ways for them to help kids socially, emotionally, to kind of stay in that vein. But yeah, I mean, books need funding, and so this was a huge lesson in how to make all of that happen. So stay tuned.
And so, because that was my other question. So are you kind of sticking with like a theme of it's gonna kind of fall, like you said, like the wolf stories, or are there animals involved, or how would that?
I mean, I think the core stories that are I've sort of planned out are in the pack.
Okay.
And kind of, I don't want to get too much into it, but like, a little bit of like the fallout of being back together. Right? Because there was this whole isolation and how we dealt with that. But now that we're like back to school and now that like people are back together, I think there's a different sort of need there. So that's one idea that I have and different backstories on some of the other kids to help, kids socially, emotionally in different ways.
Right. And you did mention too, I think that you got input with kids along the way as you're writing this. Is that how important do you feel that is as a children's book author to kind of beta read these to children ahead of time before they get published?
From me, who comes from an educator perspective, for me it was clutch. Like I wanted the kids to have their voice in there. I wanted them to. This is for them. This was really, this book was a labor of love, and I wanted to make sure I was showing up for them in the way that they needed, right? Yeah. So I, even just having conversations about like, how does it feel? How does this feel to be away from your friends? How does it feel to have to go to school on the computer? And how does it, and just really listening to them, and then sharing the story and seeing what parts really hit them, and what parts could use some work. To me, I think the kid, it's really important. Right.
It's almost like, as you're saying, it's like you're talking with them, not talking down to them through the book as well.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I tried to have the Mama Wolf character really be someone who saw kids and made them feel seen and heard, and been like, listen, I see that you're going through this big thing. Like and it's okay that you are. But you also have the power to change it within you, right. So kind of to empower kids and give them that, like, yes, it's okay to have big feelings, but what can we do with it? And how can you flip your script? Right. And what does it feel like when you've done that,
Right. Yeah. And so, with that said, have you seen, other, as you're looking at us through some of your, like, therapist friends or other educator friends, what has their response been to to this, and have they been able to also kind of give you some some points where they would that as I say. So what's my question here? So I'll edit this part in post. So what were some of the other lessons you wish that you were able to read to children as an educator that you've been wanting to put on paper as well?
With it, that I feel like I did with this book.
Yes. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. A big one is, I think you often hear adults say to children, like, stop it, like, stop crying, right? Like, buck up, like, you're fine, you're okay, and I think that's really not a healthy message to send kids, because what does that create? That creates people who shove their emotions, right? And, that's going to turn into adults who are shoving who think it's not okay to be sad or be angry or be frustrated or, feel, lost in the moment or those things. And I think it's important that we validate those feelings for kids. As the adult in the picture, is it difficult to deal with kids in those moments? Absolutely. Like, it's very frustrating, and it's much easier for us to be like, stop it, stop crying, But I think there's a better way, and there's a healthier way that we can go about it. And that was a message I really wanted to put in this book. But not to leave the adults hanging in, that way, and empower kids so that, yes, it's okay to feel this way, but you can take control of it. What are the things that you can do to flip your own script? Do you need to go play some music? Do you need to do some art? Do you need to go out into, run free in nature? Do you need to read a book? My son, he learned how to read during the pandemic, and I had like this kind of awesome gift of getting to teach him how to read, which, is not something a parent usually, gets to do. And it was in the spring when we were first in lockdown, and he just took off with reading. He's in first grade. He reads at a much higher level, and books were a huge escape. And there's a line in the book, he could go anywhere. Like, books helped him go anywhere, right, in his mind. So, giving kids like tools and resources for when they have those big feelings, but letting them know and letting adults know that it's really okay to acknowledge and validate kids having those feelings, because we all have them. It's not something that you grow up and you don't have these, big, heavy feelings. And the way that I describe it in the book is a backpack of boulders, right? Which is how I think we all felt during this pandemic, like really heavy and weighed down. And just helping kids unpack that. Like, how do you unpack that backpack of boulders and help yourself? And if you learn that as a young child, and that's something that you carry with, I think it leads to much more healthy adults and mental health awareness.
And exactly. I mean, it's like, mental health. I mean, if there's anything that we can glean from these last 18 months, is that mental health and wellness is important for everyone. I mean, removing the stigma of talking about these therapeutic options and talking about, as you say, self-regulation and all these skills. It's kind of opened it up. It's kind of opened it up a bit. And your book is a perfect example of being able to talk about that stuff. Is, as you said there, feel your feelings. Like, it's not to disparage the books that talk about the children's book that talk about how to ride a school bus or like like your 4 food groups. I mean, those are important too, but it's like the lasting relationships that somebody has with their own with their own self-regulation is extremely important.
Yeah, it's a big takeaway, and it's a message that I think we all can, and I think that's why the story hit adults. I think they just, because we all need a little bit of that right now. Like, what are the things that helped pull us out of this? Because there's a mental health pandemic within the So I think, just getting it on the table and I found when I started sharing that binder with kids at, I think one of the first places I was at baseball practice, and I wasn't reading to the baseball players. My son was off playing baseball, but there are these little siblings who were around. And, you know, I said to the parents, do you mind? And they were like, oh, please take them. So I was reading to them, and it was incredible. And they were young, you know, I would say 5, 4. The things that it was evoking them to talk about is they were like, oh, I remember when I was alone like Elvis. I couldn't see my friends. I was at my grandma's, and just like all these things. And honestly, it was like they were waiting for someone to say, it's okay to talk about it. You know, you just live through it. And I think adults, especially with something as big as a pandemic, we want to move on from it, right? Like, we want to be done with it. We don't want to ever talk about it again. We don't want to rehash it. No one wants to relive it.
Right.
But kids are different. And I think kids are kind of left looking around like, what just happened? Like, you know, can we talk about this? Like, I just went to school in the basement for a year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was kind of an answer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. So thank you very much, Colleen. So we're at the top of our hour. So listen, come back on when you want to talk about the next, you know, Mama Wolf Publishing book when it comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the books are now for sale on my website, which is www.wolfnamedelvis.com.
Right.
So yes, you now can, at the top of that way. Yeah, there you go. You can purchase books, because I've had a few people even message me today when they saw the books were here. They're like, I missed the Kickstarter, and I was like, don't worry.
And $20. That's that is a perfect price. I mean, that's a great price for a children's book.
Yeah. You know, with self-publishing, especially, you know, you're really selling a piece of art that people really were, you know.
Right. Yeah. Perfect. Well, like I said, once again, congratulations, Colleen.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, look forward to talking to you again.